All right, folks, you got Harrington here. Let's take up our conversation from last week. Recall that we touched on offshore asset protection as a bit of a refresher program. And recall the reason is that, well, we have an outgoing administration and incoming administration of different party affiliations. And in my experience, whenever that happens, I tend to get a wave of phone calls, usually people affiliated with the outgoing administration. And they want to know about their options, So last time we talked about what you can do offshore. If you're convinced the world, or not the world, but the country is going to hell in a handbasket, you might want to look offshore. Check out that episode if you didn't already. And this time I want to talk about domestic asset protection. So feel however you want to feel politically. I assiduously avoid getting into politics on this podcast. And in fact, it really doesn't matter. I mean, these are concepts that you should be aware of, irrespective of what's happening politically. So here we go. All right, when we're talking about domestic asset protection, we're usually talking about trusts. And you guys know I love trusts. I'm going to drop you some links below so you can have a peek at some of my many articles and more recent videos that I've done having to do with the use of trusts in Florida and throughout the United States. So, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I won't take time to get into the details here, but you've got those links below, don't forget. And let's just touch on the main things. What's the first thing that I love about trusts? Well, they're completely anonymous. I mean, those are creatures that live off the books in just about every way. A trust doesn't get filed with the State Department. It doesn't get recorded at the county level unless you want to, but you don't have to. There's no requirement. So it just lives as a creature of paper. It's just a piece of paper you can put in your safe. And that gives you great anonymity, and it also gives you great flexibility. Now, why do I say that trusts are very flexible, and why is that important? Well, let's say that circumstances in your life change. Somebody that you wanted to be the beneficiary, maybe you no longer want to be the beneficiary of a trust, or let's say there's some unexpected threat, and it's not in your best interest to remain the trustee of your trust. Just for example. All right, well, to make those changes, there's no state filings. There's nothing to be done at the courthouse. You simply call me or somebody like me, and we will draft you, the amended version. You sign it, and it's done. Very, very flexible, very, very confidential. That's a beautiful thing. So that was point number one, trusts. Let's not get any further into that because you guys know I have written and spoken a lot about trusts. So just go check out those links if you want to get into the weeds on, how you transfer items into trusts and what that process looks like. Let's go on to item number two, which is some new material here. Let's talk about corporations versus LLCs. I think a lot of people kind of have the notion that a corporation is somehow better liability protection than an LLC. And if anything, the opposite would be true. The reason is this. Corporations have shares. LLCs technically do not have any shares. Why would that make a difference? Well, because shares are personal property. So let's say that you have a threat from a creditor that's against you personally. Well, they won't be able to attack the corporation. However, your shares are within your estate. It's your personal property. So they could theoretically foreclose on your shares in a corporation. Not so with an LLC. There are no shares to be foreclosed on. So even if you do have a creditor who's coming at you personally, there's nothing for them to foreclose on. The best they can do is get what's called a charging lien. And we're going to talk about how that is also easily defeated. Let's get into that in part three. Part three, multi-member LLCs. You may have heard that term before. And why is it term worthy? It's because if you have more than one member, then these charging liens are very easily defeated. So what is a charging lien? It's like a judgment. If a creditor gets a judgment against you and they want to attach your assets, they can. If you have an LLC, there are no shares to attach. So the best they can do is get a charging lien, which says any money that the LLC distributes to you personally is subject to garnishment. All right, so that's a charging lien. All right, if you just think in practical terms, that's very easy to get around. Let's say you name a spouse or a son or a trusted friend or whomever as another member to the LLC. Well, you could easily, distribute to this other person rather than yourself, and you're right around the charging lane. So I know we're going quick and dirty here. Let me just recap. Okay, if we're talking about domestic asset protection, then we're talking about number one, trusts, the use of trust. Very powerful vehicle. 2, LLCs are better than corporations. And 3, multi-member LLCs are better still. Okay, just a couple of honorable mentions before we finish here. Homestead. Florida and certain other states have the concept of homestead, which has been famously taken advantage of by O.J. Simpson, for example. And it's quite powerful. It only applies to your primary residence. You do need to register with the State Department, but with very limited exceptions, such as the bank that gave you the loan to buy the property, or maybe mechanics liens where somebody did some work on the property and didn't get paid. Those are really the only two parties, at least that I can think of off the top of my head, that can put any kind of a lien or encumbrance against your homestead property. Otherwise, given a little bit of time, it's quite bulletproof. So if you are in the state of Florida, and especially if you don't have a mortgage on your primary residence, definitely take advantage of that homestead protection. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is tenancy by the entireties. And that applies to spouses, essentially, spouses. So the concept is this. A tenancy, something that's owned by the entireties, means that it can't be divided, that both spouses own all of it, if that makes any sense. And the legal effect that it has is if one spouse has a creditor who wants to attach that particular asset, but it's owned by the entireties between both spouses, then that creditor can't get to that item, whatever it is. So that can be useful if used strategically. The problem is if both spouses have the same creditor, then that by the entireties doesn't help. But nonetheless, be aware of the concept. So there you have it, folks. Domestic asset protection, a bit of a refresher course. I kind of cobbled together concepts from several different videos into this one. So I will be sure to drop the links below so you can follow up on the particular topic that you found of interest. So, again, whatever your political view may be, I do think that this upcoming administration promises to be something. I don't think it's going to be boring. And we're here to talk about asset protection if you would like to have that conversation. Recuerda que todos aquí hablamos español, menos uno, un abogado que habla ruso, for whatever reason. As for the stuff below, the comments, the likes, and all that, thank you guys. You come up and say, hey, I'm enjoying your podcast. I really appreciate that. Would it kill you to just drop me a little comment or something like that? Thanks a lot, and we will see you next week.